In this video, we'll be covering everything you need to know about Neuvillette, such as his role, talents, builds, teams, and more. We'll also touch on his constellations for those considering putting high investment into him. My name is Anchovies, and I make Genshin content centered around guides, analyses, and lore. Without further ado, let's get into the video. To summarize, Neuvillette is a 5-star Hydro Catalyst user who operates as an on-field charge attack DPS. While his focus is on dealing damage, he has enough application to work as a driver or enabler. His charge attacks are his main source of damage. Casting it without any droplets nearby will cause him to charge until he forms a seal before his animation activates. Then he'll deal damage in the stance for 3 seconds and lose a portion of his HP over time so long as he is above 50% max HP. However, doing it like this takes way too long, which is where his elemental skill and burst come into play. These abilities, upon casting them, will create 3 and 6 droplets respectively. If you hold his charge attack with these droplets nearby, he'll pick up at most 3 of them, which heals him for a portion of his max HP per droplet. He then starts his charge attack animation. Because he uses 3 at a time and his skill and burst create a total of 9 droplets, he can do his charge attack up to 3 times in this manner. For Fontaine related content, Neuvillette's elemental skill deals Numa aligned damage. In terms of distribution, his normal attack talent makes up most of his damage, followed by his elemental burst and skill. Thus, the only talent that's necessary to level is his normal attacks, since an overwhelming majority of his damage comes from his charge attacks. Afterwards, you can choose to level up his elemental burst and skill if you want to. Now let's talk about his Ascension passives. His first passive grants him a past Draconic Glory stack when a Hydro-based reaction is triggered. He can have up to 3 stacks and each stack lasts 30 seconds. Note that stacks created from different reactions are independent from each other. Because each stack lasts 30 seconds, this incentivizes longer rotations where the start of the team will often be spent doing setups to get these stacks. You'll be able to get 2 or 3 stacks in most scenarios depending on the team that you're running him in. Overall, it's a nice boost in damage that is well appreciated for Neuvillette's damage output. His second passive grants him a Hydro damage bonus based on each percent of his current HP that is above 30% max HP. This passive caps at 30% Hydro damage bonus, or when his current HP is equal to 80% of his max HP. In most of his charge attack rotations, he fluctuates between full HP and nearly half HP. On average, his current HP is estimated to hover around 70% of his max HP, meaning he'll often gain near max benefits from this passive's bonus. Pairing this with his previous passive gives Neuvillette a lot of bonus damage for himself, allowing him to efficiently fulfill his role. Because Neuvillette is a DPS unit, it's natural for people to question his functionality in comparison to other Hydro DPS units like Childe or Ayato. While Neuvillette has just enough application to be a decent driver or enabler, his main focus is on dealing damage. His passives and kit HP drain and gain mechanics assist him in doing this. Conversely, Childe and Ayato sacrifice some high personal damage for their application and enabling capabilities. Childe is frequently used as an on-field enabler for national teams due to his strong application through his melee stance and Riptide effect. This makes it to where highly investing in Childe is quite beneficial for players who like speedrunning or want a strong team core. Similarly, Ayato can also operate in national teams in this manner. However, compared to Childe and Neuvillette, he has more team and role flexibility due to having both on and off-field capabilities through his elemental skill and burst. Additionally, his passives assist in both his damage and supportive capabilities. One of the main upsides of Ayato is his ease of playability, especially when compared to Childe. However, his one-dimensionality also hinders him, as doing things like double swirling in vape teams often requires him to use his burst every rotation, whereas Childe can do the same thing but simply triggering his skill. Although not a big hindrance, it's still something to consider. For artifact sets, Marchesi Hunter is his uncontested best in slot set, as its 2-piece provides a boost in his charge attacks, and Neuvillette's HP drain and gain makes it easy to maintain max stacks of the 4-piece effect. If you don't have a good Marchesi Hunter set, then 4-piece Heart of Death and 2-piece combinations with HP percent can work until then. For main stats, you'll want to go either HP Hydro Crit or HP Crit. Whichever one performs better is going to depend on things like a damage percent buffs, resistance shred, etc. Full HP or HP Hydro HP are also viable options, but only if you have really good subsets to compensate for the lack of crit stats. If you're unsure which would perform better for you, I would highly suggest using things like an optimizer or calculator to solve that issue. His best weapon by far is Tome of the Eternal Flow. It provides HP percent, charge attack bonus damage, and energy restoration that all benefit Neuvillette. Compared to other weapon options besides Sacrificial Jade, it severely outperforms them. And speaking of Sacrificial Jade, this 4-star Battle Pass weapon is actually his next best option, especially at higher refinements. The main problem with this weapon is its buffs time restriction, tightening Neuvillette's rotation. Thankfully, Neuvillette takes around 9 to 10 seconds to do 3 consecutive charge attacks, so most, if not all of his charge attacks will be buffed if he's not interrupted. And even if this was more of an issue, altering his rotation to swap in and out more often will extend his rotation time, which isn't a major hindrance to him. If you can't use either of these and don't have an HP percent or crit stat 5-star weapon, then Prototype Amber is a viable choice. Not only is it craftable, but it has an HP percent stat and offers team-wide healing and energy back to Neuvillette. This upcoming event is also introducing the free 4-star weapon Ballad of the Boundless Blue. Its ER stat alleviates most of Neuvillette's energy needs, and its passive increases charge attack damage. And because it's from an event, getting it to R5 will be very easy, making it another usable option alongside Prototype Amber for free-to-play players. Now this section is specifically for those who are thinking about investing in Neuvillette through Constellations. I'll go through each constellation and at the end give my general thoughts on his most valuable one. His Constellation 1 grants him 1 stack of past Draconic Glories when he is on field. His resistance to interruption is also increased while using his charge attack. This allows for Neuvillette to only need 2 Hydra-based reactions to be triggered instead of 3, opening room for more team variety and accessibility. The interruption resistance is a nice bonus as it makes him less dependent on shielders or other forms of defensive utility. The main issue with this constellation is it can be redundant, especially since there's already a decent selection of teams who can help him reach 3 passive stacks. Plus, if you have characters with crowd control or interruption resistance built on your account, then the quality of life from the interruption resistance increase becomes less noticeable. His Constellation 2 enhances his Ascension 1 passive. For each stack of past Draconic Glories, his charge attack's crit damage is increased, maxing at 42%. This constellation benefits from his C1's extra stack and makes Marchesi Hunter even more valuable for him due to the free crit damage gained. Overall, a nice constellation that increases his personal damage. His Constellation 3 increases his normal attack talent level by 3, making the maximum upgrade level 15. Following the trend of recent Fontaine units that are normal or charge attack based, this constellation is more useful for his kit. His Constellation 4 allows Neuvillette to create a droplet when he is healed while on field. This can occur once every 4 seconds. Now, this constellation indirectly increases his personal damage output as it allows him to do an additional charge attack sequence per rotation. However, without C6 it ends up being really unnecessary. His Constellation 5 increases his Elemental Burst talent by 3, making the maximum upgrade level 15. His Elemental Burst doesn't really contribute much to his personal damage and is honestly primarily used for the droplets, so this constellation doesn't matter that much. His Constellation 6 has a series of buffs. After using his charge attack, Neuvillette absorbs droplets in an AoE and increases his charge attack duration by 1 second per droplet. Additionally, when his charge attack hits opponents, it shoots 2 additional currents once every 2 seconds, dealing a portion of Neuvillette's max HP as hydro damage. The damage dealt in this way counts as damage dealt by his charge attack. Like most DPS C6s, this drastically increases on-field presence and encompasses the term hypercarry. The additional currents also provide additional hydro application, making his enabling capabilities even more effective. His C4's extra droplets are also beneficial to extending his on-field time. Now, if you were to go for his constellations, I genuinely think that his Constellation 1 would be a nice stopping point because of its extra passive stack alongside less reliance on defensive utility. However, this then creates a dilemma on whether to get his Constellation 1 or his signature weapon. This will depend on various factors like disposable income, current primogems, etc, etc. However, the main 3 questions to answer are you getting his Battle Pass weapon? And more specifically, do you plan to get refinements for it? Do you already have well-built teams that grant him 3 passive stacks? And do you really want the comfort of its interruption resistance? The last question is especially relevant if you don't have many defensive utility options or do not want to build them. And based on how you answer these questions, we'll make this decision more clear for you. In cases where you would rather get his signature weapon is if you're not getting refinements for Sacrificial Jade, or maybe you have a team that can fully utilize his passive, and or you just don't care for his Constellation 1's interruption resistance, whether that be because you already have defensive utility options or the comfort simply is not worth your primogems. Conversely, if you plan to get Sacrificial Jade and eventually refine it over time, or you think the interruption resistance's comfort will be beneficial to you, then that's when I would say maybe pull for a C1 instead. Now, this is simply a general guideline to give you a brief idea on how to approach this matter. At the end of the day, they are your primogems, so whether you fully take this in or not is completely up to you. So now let's get into his teams, starting with his main team, which is a hypercarry team. This team features Neuvillette, Kazuha, Fischl, and Zhongli. The focus of this team is helping Neuvillette get passive stacks through various hydro-based reactions alongside damage percent buffs from Kazuha in order to increase his personal damage. Zhongli will almost always be the preferred defensive option for this team, though other shielders can work if you don't have him. While Fischl is the preferred offensive unit, other off-field units like Amiko or Mona, if you have his C1, can work. Next is Hyperbloom, a nice single target team that deals a lot of damage on its own but still appreciates Neuvillette's personal damage. This team features Neuvillette, a Dendro and Electro unit, and a Flex unit. For the Dendro slot, Nahida, Kale, or Dendro Traveler work for offensive options. If you have Baiju or Yao Yao, they can be used as defensive options since their application can be enough in single target and minimal AoE situations. You can either use Kuki or Raiden as your off-field Electro trigger, depending on if you need Kuki's healing or prefer Raiden's ability to trigger from a larger distance. For the Flex slot, any defensive unit, second Electro, or Dendro unit can be used. If you're using Baizhu as your primary Dendro unit, using Kazuha or another animal unit can be justifiable since Baiju's Dendro application isn't that strong. Using Kazuha also allows for a third Hydro-based reaction, making it possible to get 3 passive stacks in this team archetype. Neuvillette can also work decently in Nilou Bloom teams with him, Nilou, and 2 Dendro units. Bloom's self-damage will often incentivize you to run a defensive Dendro option like Baizhu, Kirawa, or Yao Yao on your team. Though EM is preferred on Bloom teams, especially since he'll own a decent portion of the Bloom cores, you can get away with running his standard build in these teams. Other teams you can use include Taser and Vape, though compared to his other teams, these definitely have their situations on when to use them. Taser is nice for AoE content and can be fun if you have a Beto built since her burst works with Neuvillette's charge attacks. She also provides slightly more comfortability for Neuvillette with her C1's shield. Vape teams like National with a flex unit in the last slot are usable as it dishes out decent damage simply because of its team archetype, but comes with the consequence of Neuvillette having to be a bit closer to enemies due to Xiangling's burst. This will incentivize most players to run a defensive option in the flex slot instead of an anima buffer or a second Hydro. Alright, and that is going to conclude this Neuvillette guide. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below for more Genshin content. Let me know your thoughts on Neuvillette, whether or not you're pulling for him. If you already have him, then how are you enjoying him so far? And until the next video, bye bye.